So let's just get right to it. First of all, we are going to talk about quizzes specifically, and even though they're called quizzes, a lot of people use quizzes for a lot of different reasons. For instance, you might give it for just a quick formative assessment, a quick homework assignment, or you could give it as a major test, or you could give it as a unit quiz or something like that. So just because it's called a quiz doesn't mean that you have to use it as such. But what it is a really good way for students to interact with material and get feedback, and for you to get some data on what they understand and what they don't. So that's just kind of the background to why you would want to use a quiz in the first place. So what we want to do today is walk you through the two main steps to creating a quiz. There are two main steps. The first step is to set up the link, to set up all the parameters, to set up all the restrictions and all the rights and all those kinds of things. And the other step is to actually add questions that students can answer on the quiz. Okay, so let me go ahead and share my screen here, and we'll get it. What I'm going to do as we go through this is actually create a quiz so that you can see how I would do it. And I'm going to start with the simplest way to create a quiz here, because as we pointed out in the last session, can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. One of the things we pointed out in the last session is you can actually just go ahead and get started on a quiz right away. You could just set a quiz in motion, you can put questions on it and try it out with kids without having to mess with all of the fancy parameters that go along with the quiz. So let me just show you how to do that. I have this is kind of like my iLearn course to just kind of play around with things and try things out. So that's why it says Harrison up at the top. To get started on creating a quiz, I'm going to click right here where it says Turn Editing On. And if you've messed around with iLearn or with Moodle at all, you know that that's the first thing that you have to set in motion in order to do anything. Okay, and I'm going to go down to topic 1 here, and that's where I'm going to add my quiz. So I'm going to go down to Add an Activity or Resource. If you're familiar with iLearn or with Moodle, you know that you can add activities or resources. Resources are basically you just sharing information with kids. They're not actually doing anything with them. Okay? An activity is something that they actually are going to interact with. Okay? And that's what a quiz is. So you can add either one of those types of resources or activities. When I click Add an Activity or Resource, I've got lots of options. The first set is activities. These are all things that students can interact with, and we'll spend a lot of time in the future going through some of these other modules and things like that. And then down below are the set of resources that you could put on your iLearn page or your Moodle page, or your Moodle course rather. But we want to focus today on the quiz, which happens to be one of the most powerful modules. It's actually, it could be, if you let it be, one of the most complicated things that you do. But in doing it, that's because it's one of the most common things that people start off with. You actually learn a little bit about how iLearn is used in some of the other modules too. So it's kind of like you're starting off with something that is it's kind of like the Mercedes-Benz of the modules in Moodle. Okay, so I'm going to select Quiz. Okay. And it gives you a little bit of information. Here are some other things that you can use quizzes for. I'm going to click Add, and it takes me to the first part of the first phase of creating a quiz, and that is setting up the link. Right. So in order to set up a quiz, you can decide when it opens and when it closes, and whether or not students have a password for it and things like that. That's the first phase. Okay, so that's what we're going to work on first. Now, as we mentioned before, if you want to just get started with a quiz, the only thing that you actually have to have in the quiz edit screen is the name for the quiz. Okay, so let's call this quiz Tech Coach Sample. Okay. Now, if I just want to get started and I want to throw some questions on the quiz and have students try it out, I can scroll all the way down to the bottom and just hit Save and Display, and they're ready to go. I can start adding questions to the quiz. I don't have to worry about all the parameters. Okay, but what I want to do today is show you what is possible with a quiz. Okay, so the reason I know that this is something that's required is right here there's a little red asterisk which is going to be next to everything that you must include on the page. So I've given it a name. The next box is the description. All right, and in the description, it'll allow you to give some specific directions to students, so they know what the quiz is going to cover, what they need to do with their cell phones, for instance, whether or not they can have another tab open or something like that. So I'm going to say this covers chapters 10 and 11. Please put your books away and sit quietly until I tell you to start. Okay? So when they click on the quiz name, they're going to see the description. They're going to see the instructions. Okay? Now, with much of what I'm going to take you through here, there are going to be some things that you don't really have to worry about that really are completely unnecessary, that are tiny little details that I wouldn't even mess with either. So like this one right here. Okay, this box, if I check that box, all that does is it puts the description, my little instructions, on my course page so that students don't actually have to click on the link in order to see it. Not that important. Okay, and as we go through, I'm going to skip a lot of those, and you can assume that if I skip it, it's probably not something that you really need to pay all that much attention to, but by all means, feel free to explore on your own. Okay, if there's something that I don't talk about, there's a little question mark next to many of the things, and if you click on it, it will pop up with some extra help for you, so it'll give you a little bit further description of some of the parameters. Okay. Now, below the description, the first setting that you can change is the timing. Okay, so if we click timing, that'll expand the setting. And you'll notice with the timing, you can set the quiz to open at a certain time, on a certain day. And in order to enable that, you have to check the little box right here. And what this means right now is this quiz will open today, March 22nd, 2016, at, and this is military time, so you've got to remember that as you're setting your time to open, that it's going to open at 4:06 p.m., okay, which is actually when I initiated the quiz. That means that students can click on the quiz at any time, but they won't actually have the option to start the quiz until the open date and time. Okay? You can also set a close date and time, right, if you want. If you choose not to, the quiz will just remain open, although if a student has met all the other requirements, they won't necessarily be able to take the quiz. And I'll show you that a little bit later on. And it also initiates some more feedback at a certain point in time as well. So if I check this box and I change the time to, oh, let's just make it 20:06, which is, what would that be? That would be 8:06 p.m. This evening. So at any time between 4:06 p.m. and 8:06 p.m., students can log in and they can take the test or quiz. Okay? You can also set a time limit on the quiz. Let's say you want to give them 10 minutes to answer the questions that are on the quiz. Okay? You can set that to a certain number of days or hours or weeks also. And you can let them come back and forth into the quiz if you choose to do it that way. Okay? Here's one of those settings that by default is pretty much exactly what it should be. If you have a close time or a time limit, or you have a closed date, and students take the quiz and they don't hit the button that says submit all and finish, this will automatically close their attempt after time expires. Okay, you want to leave it that way. And in a lot of these settings, there's a little link that says show more. There are additional settings that you can change beyond that. We won't spend a lot of time clicking show more because most of those you're not going to want to change anyway. Okay, so that's the timing of the quiz. Any questions from anybody?
And Bob, now would be a good time to remind people about our document on the
Yeah.
Tech Coach blog?
Right. Do you want to show them that, Amy?
Sure. Let me just share my screen here. 1 second. So if you go to our Tech Coach blog, which is iblog.dearbornschools.org/techcoaches, you'll see right here that if you have questions, you can submit them by clicking on the link here. And it takes you to a page that has been set up for you to type your questions in there. And you can see we already have some people who have asked questions. So at any point in the show, if you are not able to join the Hangout but you have questions, you can go to the blog, click on the link, and you can type your questions in there, and we'll do our best to answer them during the broadcast.
Okay, great. That's great thing. And even after the broadcast, if you want to be still asking questions, you're more than welcome to put it on there. But it's probably going to be a little bit more effective to just go ahead and email us. So feel free to keep on adding, but email us or make an appointment with us, and we can walk you through things. That, by the way, that's good that you mentioned that. There's another document that we want you to pay attention to on the Tech Coach blog. We have this section right down here underneath the title. And Amy, can you see my screen now?
I can.
Okay. If you click on How Do I, you'll notice that we have a bunch of resources for Dearborn teachers here. That is, it's constantly growing. But one of the sections that we have is iLearn, which again is called Moodle. If you click right here, there's an extensive help document that will walk you through all of the different parts of creating a quiz that we're going to talk about today. So if you forget anything or you want a little bit more information, we would love to have you check this out too. Okay? It's got screen captures, and it's also got some things with some of the settings where we kind of recommend what you should use, especially if you're trying out a quiz for the first time. Okay? So check that out. That, again, is on the Tech Coach blog under How Do I? Okay? So back to the quiz. We got up to timing. Let's move on and talk next about the grade. The grade setting allows you to attribute the student's grade to a specific category, and you have to have those preloaded in your course, and that's kind of another session if you'd like to take a look at that. We'll do another session on things like that later on. You can set a grade to pass, which if a student meets a certain grade, it will allow them other privileges, like to be able to do the next activity and things like that. This is probably the most important part under grade, which is the number of attempts. By default, the quiz will have, it'll give students 1 attempt. Okay, and you can change that to anything from 2 to 10, and you can even make it unlimited if you'd like. Okay, whereas they would be able to take the quiz as many times as they wanted until the quiz closes. Okay? Mm-hmm. If you do give more than 1 attempt, the question of which grade does the student get comes into play, right? And that's the grading method. As it's set right now, the student would be able to take it as many times as he or she wanted, but it would be the highest grade that would actually go into the Moodle, the iLearn gradebook. Okay. Now, you can also transport grades from Moodle into MyStar or into your grading program and stuff like that. That, again, is another issue. This is just the grade as it would appear on iLearn. Okay? So that's grade. We'll close that. And we'll move on to layout. Within the layout screen, you can change the number of questions that's on each page. So you can have all of the questions on one big, long, scrolling page, which there are some advantages to. I like to have at least, or down to no more than about 2 or 3 questions per page for a couple reasons. One of the reasons is that it makes it a little bit more difficult for students to cheat if they're sitting next to somebody who's also doing the same quiz, if they have only a certain number of questions on each page, because the likelihood that they're looking at the same questions as the person next to them is reduced that way. The other thing is that in order for them to move from one page to the next, they have to click a little button that records the answers that they've already put in. So if it should happen that the computer dies, or they lose power, or something happens, like there's a fire drill or something like that, at least the answers are saved on all of the previous pages. So good idea to limit the number of questions per page.
And also, Bob, I just wanted to throw in that if you set your default for 2 questions per page and you're working on your quiz and you decide that these 3 questions or these 4 questions belong together on a page, you can change that while you're creating the quiz. It doesn't mean that because you set it at 2 questions, you're stuck at 2 questions per page. You can change that when you're adding your quiz questions later on.
Absolutely, that's a great point. And it's also a good time to point out that any one of these settings, you can also change any of these settings at any time too. So nothing in iLearn is really set in stone. And I say that except for when you have the students start taking the quiz. So once a student has taken the quiz, there are some limitations on some of the changes that you can make. Okay. Speaking of limitations on changes, this parameter right here, the navigation method, by default is set to free. Okay, and that means students can go back and forth. They can change the page that they're on. They can change the question that they're going to. They can go all the way to the end of the quiz, and then they can return back to some of the earlier questions. That's free navigation. You can also set the question or the quiz so that it is sequential, which means that the students, once they finish a page or once they move on to the next page, they can't go back to previous pages. Okay, I like to leave it at free just because you know, sometimes students want to go back to a question, and sometimes they want to review things before they turn in their quiz. So we'll leave that at free for now. The next setting is the question behavior. And this is probably my favorite set of parameters here, and I want to be careful not to spend too much time on it because there's really a ton of different stuff that you can do. Starting with this one, this one's obvious, shuffling within the questions. That's if you have multiple choice questions, it'll shuffle the answers, the choices A, B, C, and D from student to student. Okay, and you can turn that off if you'd like to. This parameter, though, is the one that starts to make your quiz something that's way different from what students would do on paper. Okay? By default, question behavior is set to deferred feedback, which means students are going to answer all the questions. They're going to turn in their test to the teacher, to you, and because it's also online, any questions that are automatically graded will be graded, and they can get their grade and they can get their feedback as soon as they turn it in. Okay? Just like a normal test, although they're going to get a little bit quicker feedback probably. Okay? But when you click on the drop-down, you see that there are many other question behaviors to choose from, one of which is my favorite, which is adaptive mode. Okay? So adaptive mode allows students to answer a question, and with some of the feedback that we're going to put in motion a little bit later, they can decide whether or not they want to answer the question again if they get it wrong. And that's helpful because in a lot of cases students know they can at least narrow a question down to 2 possible answers. And if they choose the wrong one, but they knew what another possible answer was, kind of seems fair to let them have at least part of the credit, and that's what adaptive mode does. Okay, so with each question, they have the chance to answer it. They get feedback right away, and they can answer the question again. But when they do, they get penalized for it. By default, they get a 33% penalty for each incorrect answer. Okay, so that's adaptive mode. There's also one called immediate feedback. Immediate feedback allows students to get feedback on whether or not their question or their answer to the question was right, and they get it right away, but they can't change their answer. So they answer the question, they hit the little button that says check, and they find out that it's wrong, but if it is wrong, they're stuck with the wrong answer. Okay? And then just to give you an idea of some of the other things that are there, there are a couple formats here, question behaviors, that are called CBM. CBM stands for certainty-based marking. And what that asks the student to do is not only answer the question, but also indicate how sure they are of their answer, which kind of takes away guessing. And it does so because what it's going to do is ask them whether they're very sure, whether they're kind of sure, or whether they're not very sure. And their grade for a question is going to be based on how sure they say they are. So if they say that they're really sure about their answer and they get it right, they get more. They get extra credit, actually. But if they say that they're really sure and they get the question wrong, they lose even more points in the negative. Okay, so a fun little thing to play around with, especially with practice quizzes and things like that. But for now, I'm going to set my quiz to adaptive mode. That's the one that it's going to allow them to find out if they're right or wrong and then change the answer if they choose to. Okay. The next setting says each attempt builds on the last, and what that's going to do is allow students to come back into a quiz later on after they've finished the quiz, or later on if they haven't finished the quiz. And then again, there's a little link that says show more below. Okay. Now, the review options. We'll go through those next. You'll notice in the review options there are 4 columns here. And these represent 4 different time periods in and surrounding the quiz. The first column deals with during the attempt. That's while the students are taking the quiz. Okay. Immediately after the attempt is the first 2 minutes after the quiz is after the student submits their quiz. And then later while the quiz is still open is after this time period, but until we get to the close date if you set one, which is up above. Okay? And then after the quiz is closed, these settings only take place, or they only kick in if you do have a close date and time set. Okay? Then for each one of these time periods, you'll notice there are the same options. You have the attempt, whether correct, points, specific feedback, the answers, and other feedback. Okay? Just to take you through a couple of these, and notice the question marks are next to each one of these, so it'll tell you exactly what you're setting with each check mark here.
Bob,
yep.
can I interrupt for 1 second?
Sure.
I would just talk about the ones that are checked as the default for right now.
Good idea.
Because I really feel like the help menu is really helpful. So if they had questions on the other part, they could just check the help menu. But I would just walk through the default right now, because as we set that as what we thought, most people would use. So
yeah.
I would just go that route.
Good idea. The only difference that I'm going to add to that is the fact that I have it set to adaptive mode. So I'm going to have to change a couple of the settings here. But in addition to that, we'll leave everything as it is. Okay. So by default, the only thing that students can see during the attempt is the attempt, and what that means is they can see the questions and they can see their answers. Obviously, you want that to be the case, so you don't even have the option of unchecking that box. But because I have my quiz in adaptive mode, I also want students to be able to know right away whether their answer is correct, and I want them to see that they're being penalized. So I'm going to add these 2 options onto my review options here. Okay. Beyond that, you can put specific feedback into questions and give feedback based on whether they chose answer A or answer B or C or whatever. You can put general feedback into each question, so you can tell them like what page number they can find more information on. You can give them the right answer, and then overall feedback is something that we'll get to a little bit later. So you see that immediately after the attempt, the only thing that students should be able to see is the number of points they earned and the overall feedback. Later, while the quiz is still open, they can see their score again, but only the overall feedback. And then after it closes, they get to see everything. Okay? So let's move on. To appearance, that's one of those that really doesn't have anything that you really need to mess with. So we're gonna kind of skip over that one. Next is extra restrictions on attempts. This is where you can give the quiz a password. And let's, since I'm at Stout Middle School today, I'm just going to put the word Stout into the box. And so students, in order to take the test, they're going to have to put the password in, and they're going to have to spell it correctly, and it's also case sensitive. So they're going to have to put a capital S into that. So you'll want to make your password nice and easy to spell, and something that students are going to know how to spell off the bat. Okay. You can also restrict a quiz to a certain network address. So, and we won't go into that too much here, but this is one of the ways that you can make sure that people or students are in the school building in order to take a quiz. So that prevents a student just, who just happens to know the password, but who's sitting at home trying to take the quiz at home. They would be restricted if you put a certain network address in here. So we can work with you on that.
All right.
If you have questions about it.
Okay.
Next is overall feedback. That was one of the review options that you have above. Overall feedback allows you to give students comments based on the score that they earn. So let's say all the students that get between a 90% and a 100%, which is already here by default, you want them to see the word excellent as soon as they finish the quiz. Okay, and then between 90 and, let's put an 80 down here, you want them to say nice work. Okay. So this is overall feedback, and again, they will see that by default if you put anything in there, but you don't have to put any overall feedback in there if you don't want to. Okay. Next is common module settings. This is where you can decide if you want to show or hide the quiz, and you can also do that from the course main page.
That's just a video training.
You can also separate the results out by group if you have groups set up in your course. So if you have your course set up into first hour, second hour, third hour, and things like that, you can separate their quiz scores based on groups. Okay. And then we have restrict access, which is a more advanced feature. I don't recommend that you play around with that until you really know what you're doing with iLearn first.
I can still help.
So we're going to hit Save and Display, and that's going to end the first phase of creating a quiz, which is setting all the parameters for the quiz. And I just want to remind you once again that you don't actually have to actually change all of the settings in order to give a quiz. All you got to do is give it a name. And so these are just some of the other things that you can do along with it. Okay. So we are going to we're going to hit Save and Display, and we're going to go to phase number 2, which is actually adding questions to the quiz. Now, when we do that, you get to see what you've set up so far. You've got the name of the quiz. You've got your directions or special instructions. You've got the parameters, the open and the close date and time. You also, and students will see this too, they'll see the open and the close date and time, and they'll also see that they need to know the quiz password in order to access the quiz. And so even though they can click on the quiz, they can see all of these other things, they can't actually start it until they put the password in. They also see the time limit, and they'll see how they're going to be graded. And if you set a limit on the number of attempts, they'll see how many attempts they're limited to. Okay? So let's start phase 2 of creating a quiz, and that is adding questions to the quiz. And you do that by clicking Edit Quiz. Now, on this screen, you'll notice there are a couple things that you can change, one of which is the maximum grade. So let's say we only, by default, it's going to give 100 points as the maximum grade. But let's say we want to make it out of 50 points. So we can change that number 100 to 50. And we have to make sure we save it. Okay. Either way, it's going to calculate a percentage of the points earned and then multiply that by the maximum grade. Okay. So that makes it a little bit easier for you to put it into your grade book if you're going to grade the quiz. Okay. You can also shuffle the questions. So each student is going to have a different question order, and you do that by checking the shuffle box here. All right. But to actually add a question, and you can do this in a lot of different ways, but we're going to show you one of them here, and that's actually to put the question right onto the quiz right within Moodle. You just click the link that says Add. Now, when you do that, you notice that you've got 3 options. One option is a new question. So you can create a brand new question right from scratch right here. Okay? The next option is from a question bank. If you have questions preloaded in a question bank, you can just draw from the preloaded question bank. Or you can select a certain number of random questions from a question bank as well. And that's, again, one of the advanced features of iLearn that you can play around with when you get really good at it. But for now, let's just create a new question here. By request, we're going to take a look at the gap fill style question. That's one of the questions that we have available to us here in Dearborn. But before I click on gap fill, you'll notice there are lots of other question types, and we'll actually probably do another session just on question types that you can use on your Moodle quizzes. All of these, with the exception of the essay question, are self-graded. So they will automatically be graded, and if you put feedback into the question, it'll give the student feedback right away as well. Okay? So, except for the essay. The essay is going to need to be manually graded if you put one of those on your quiz. So, let's choose the gap fill question, and I'll show you how to do that. So we chose gap fill. We're going to click add, and this is what it looks like anytime you create a question right here in Moodle. It's going to give you the question type up here, and you can click on the question mark to find out more about it if you'd like. It's also going to tell you what category it's going to put the question in, right? And right now I have lots of categories already preloaded into my course, but it's going to put it into the default category unless I choose one of those other categories. And again, you have to preload those categories if you'd like. The next thing and the first thing that you have to have is a question name. All right, so the question name is something that students will not see, but you will, especially when you look for a question in your question bank. So let's give it a name. I'm a biology teacher, so I like to give examples of things that are related to biology. So let's just call this one cells. Okay? And the question text is the first thing that students are actually going to be able to see. So they won't see what the question name is. So you can name it whatever you want. You can give a learning target number, or you could give it a standard or something like that, or you can even put the right answer into the question name, and students will never see that, that part of the question. Okay? Because this is a gap fill question, we're going to put in an entire statement that we want students to fill in the gaps for. Okay? So let's just make it nice and easy here. Let's say all living things are made of cells. So I'm going to type out my entire statement. Okay? And let's just put another statement in there so we can have some more blanks. These are made of parts called organelles. Okay? So I've got a couple statements here that I'm going to want students to fill in the gaps for. Okay? Now, I need to decide next which of these words I want them to either click and drag in, or type out, or appear as a drop-down. So this is a really important word. This is the word cells. That's a vocabulary word for students when they learn biology. And so is this one. So I'm going to put both of those into these square brackets. And what that's going to indicate to Moodle is that those are the words where there should be a blank. Okay? And let's say I don't want to make it too easy. There are only 2 blanks, but I want to add some more words that actually aren't answers. So I'm going to put a couple words down here as distractors. So these are not correct answers, but they're going to be options that students have to click and drag into the question. So I'm going to put atoms, and I'll put nucleus. You could also put some general feedback that students would see, but not something that's required. And then I get down here to more options. Now, right now I've marked off my correct answers with square brackets, so I'm going to leave that way. But if you don't like the square brackets, you can also choose one of these other sets of things that'll mark off the answer for you. By default, gap fill questions, again, this is a gap fill question, are set to be drag and drop questions. And I'll show you the difference between the different types of gap fill questions. Okay. Not sure what this one even does, but this one's important because right now there's going to be a gap where you see the word cells and a gap where you see the word organelles. And because organelles is a larger word, there's going to be a bigger gap for organelles. I don't want students just matching the size of the word with the size of the blank, so I'm going to check this box right here that says fixed gap size, which will, wherever there's a gap, it's going to put the same size blank into the statement. Okay. Combined feedback and multiple tries and tags, those aren't all that important, so I'm going to kind of skip over those for now. Okay. And then I'm going to save my changes. Now, once I do that, I start to see the list of questions that appear on my quiz. And right now I only have one. I can preview either the individual question or I can preview the whole quiz. And right now, since I only have one question, let's just take a look at what it would look like. To do that, you click right here on the magnifying glass. So you'll notice as you hover over it, it says preview question. And this is what a gap fill question looks like. Notice I've got my two right answers. I've got the answer cells, which belongs there, and I can click and drag that in. And then I have the answer organelles, and I can click and drag that in. But notice I also have my distractors up here as well. Okay? And also notice that the answers are shuffled. Okay? I can check my answer, and because we're in adaptive mode, if I got it wrong, I could go back and I could re-answer the question. But I just happened to get it right, so it gave me a 2 out of 2. Okay? 2 points out of 2 points. Now, let's say I want to edit this question, and I don't want it to be a gap fill question. I have a couple other options. So notice what I did. Let me go back to that. I clicked on the little cog or the gear next to my question, and it brings me back to the question edit screen. There's my question again. I'm going to click more options, and I don't want it to be a drag and drop. Now let's say I want it to be a drop down. So I'm going to select drop down and then save changes, and we'll go back to previewing the question by clicking on the magnifying glass here. Now I have gaps, but I don't have words I can click and drag in. Yep.
I'm going to interrupt you. I'm sorry. Our feed's getting a little bit blurry, and I'm wondering if it's because your battery is about to die.
It's not, but I'm going to plug in. That's a good idea.
Okay, because according to here, it looks like your battery has 0 juice.
That's not good.
Okay, well, automatically the screen is better, so.
All right. Well, that's good. I think it might have been our Wi-Fi connection here.
Okay.
Okay, so let me just clear off a seat for myself here. And we'll take a look at this question, which is now a drop-down. So here we see all living things are made of, I'm going to intentionally get this question wrong this time. I'm going to say they're all made of, nucleus. And these are made of parts called, I'll get this one right. Okay, so this answer is right, this one's wrong. When I go to check the answer, I notice that it tells me it's partially correct, and that I get 1 point out of 2, and that my submission actually attracted a penalty of 0.67, which is 33% of the total points for the question. Okay? Now, because it's in adaptive mode, I can change my answer to something that I think is more correct and check it again, and then it's going to give me a new score. Now, because I tried it again, it's going to give me a 2 out of 2 for this try, but because I tried it before and I had a penalty for it, I only get 1.33 points out of 2. Okay, so it's partially correct. I changed it, I got it fully correct, but because it was my second try, it's going to cost me. Okay, so that is a gap fill question when it's a drop down. There's one other way you can administer a gap fill question. So I'm going to click here on the question again to edit it. I'm going to go down to more options, and I'm going to change it from drop down to gap fill. Okay, and I'll hit save changes again. When I take the question this time, it requires me to actually type the answers into the blanks. Whoops. And obviously spelling counts. Okay. Oops, and I misspelled the word organelle, so it's going to penalize me. But because it is in adaptive mode, I can change my answer and get it right the next time, but I get a penalty for my answer. Okay? So that's a gap fill question. You can continue adding questions onto your quiz by clicking either add above or below these questions, and it'll put the next question wherever you click the word add. You can check out the other video from today to show you how to add a multiple choice question and how to mark the right answer and things like that. So that's how you do phase 2 of creating a quiz. So Amy, what do you think? Did we get everything?
I think we did. I think we covered everything that people would need to get started with a quiz. Like I said, all the questions were pretty straightforward. The question marks that you can click on to add to ask questions and get help. And also we have that doc that's still open. We don't have any more questions on there.
Okay.
And people can email us if they have any more questions.
Okay, sounds good. Ladies, Angie or Monica, any questions from you guys? No? Okay.
I think you have Monica muted.
Do I have her muted, or is she muted? Let's see.
Oh, I hear her.
Monica, are you there?
I think I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Any
All right,
questions?
that gap fill was my struggle, so I think I got it now.
Awesome, awesome. All right, well, ladies, thank you for joining us. And like Amy said, you can feel free to email us at any time and or make an appointment. We'll come and show you how to do things. So.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right. Have a good day.
Thanks,
too.
Bob. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.